I am going to be talking about the myth of saving money to get rich and why that is a myth. We're going to be debunking it and I'm going to show you what you should be doing instead. So, if you have been taught that you should be saving money for a rainy day and putting anywhere from 10 to 20% away into your retirement account, um, I'm going to possibly blow your mind today. So, before we dive in, I need to give you some really important background that's going to help you understand the financial context that we're in. And that's going to set the stage for what I'm going to show you at the very end, which is a way that you can generate some life changing returns. So, let's get into this. So, the first point that I need to make for background is that really the safety myth, right? Having a safety net and a safe path, that is a trap. And what do I mean by that? Well, so you've been told to get a traditional education, find a job, then invest in your retirement account and, possibly rely on your retirement savings and maybe in addition some social security if that's available. Well, I'm going to show you some pretty shocking data about senior citizens that came out, I think, in 2022, and it's based on 2021 data. And here we go. Okay. So, what this is showing you is summarizing research that came out of the US Census Bureau. And here is some really shocking information. All right. So, it says that essentially it costs about $1,000 or more for an older adult to afford their daily costs with housing and healthcare, which are the biggest chunks of that $1,000. And the average Social Security benefit is about $1,600. Now, the unfortunate part here is that poverty increased, right? Poverty increased amongst Americans aged 65 or older. So it rose from just under 9% in 2020 to over 10% in 2021. And again, that's according to US Census Bureau data. Now, keep in mind that when we say fall in poverty, it means they're not able to afford this $1,000 or more per month for their living expenses. So they are trying to live on less than that. And the interesting thing is that this is really pointing to the rapid inflationary years that we saw in 2020 and 2021. And what is inflation? I'll actually define that in a second. But here's the really sad statistic, and that is the result is 1 million more adults who rely on scarce resources to make ends meet are now um, below poverty level. And so that makes a total of 6 million older adults who live in poverty. So, why is that shocking? And that's really because that, in my mind, it's really shocking because they did everything that they were told to do, that they were supposed to do, that you and I were told to do. And that is to go to school, get a good education, get a good job, put away for your retirement, um, and then, live your golden years. But for too many Americans, and probably this is true in a lot of other countries, that's that's no longer sound advice. So is it something that they did wrong? Not necessarily. Um, Now, one major factor that is making it so hard for people to get by, not just seniors, is inflation. What is that? Inflation is the rate at which the general level of the prices of goods and services rise. And as those costs rise, it means that the dollar or whatever monetary unit you use pays for less and measures inflation, at least in the United States, is called the Consumer Price Index. And what that is it looks at this like basket of goods that Americans buy. Now, I'm not going to get into the details, but it basically uses statistics, right, to create basically an index. It adds weights, and then it does a whole calculation. So the numbers aren't direct. It isn't cost to cost, right? So it's more of a statistical analysis. Um, and so that definitely throws off the calculations a bit. But there is an alternative way to measure inflation that actually tracks the actual increase of cost of living across major U.S. cities. And it looks like, I think, 150 of the most commonly purchased goods that Americans purchase. And it actually shows a much higher rate of inflation than is reported by the CPI. So the CPI in general shows like a 2 to 3% annual increase in inflation every year. And over 2020 and 2021, maybe parts of 2022, we were seeing much more than that, right? Rates of 5, 6, 7, 8% over that span of time. But generally, the CPI says inflation happens at a rate of about 2 to 3%. But not the Chapwood Index. So let me get into that. Let me show you what that I think a truer measure actually shows for inflation. Okay. So you can see here, Chapwood Index is the real cost of living measure. So it gives, I think, a good explanation of why, if inflation is really only happening at 2 to 3% per year, like why does it feel worse than that? Well, because it actually is. And so this is just giving some background information. But like I mentioned, it reports the actual price increase of 150 items that most Americans spend their after-tax dollars on. There's no alterations, no seasonal adjustments. It's the actual prices. So let me show you what. Oh, so let me see. Oh, here we go. So it's above. Okay. So in general, when you are looking at inflationary rates as measured by the Chapwood Index, so it's looking at major cities, you're seeing these inflationary rates of around 10%, right? So 2017, 2018, I'm looking at New York here, right? 11%, 12.6%, 12%. Then you see 2022, right, when we all were feeling that inflation, 15%. You see that rate 15% for Los Angeles, almost 16% for Chicago. When you look at the actual price of goods of the top 150 most commonly bought items, you get a picture of inflation that's very different than the CPI actually shows. And I think that has a lot to do with why so many Americans are struggling, not just older Americans, but everyone, because the prices of things are going up at such a fast rate. Now, the other thing to keep in mind, the impact of the CPI being a much lower rate of inflation, it's falsely low, in my opinion, and hopefully now you'll see in yours as well, is that a lot of things are based on the CPI. So annual raises are based on CPI, like cost of living adjustments and increases are based on that. The prices of things that are set by the government are usually based on a CPI. So if, for example, your cost of living increase at your job is going up 1 to 2%, that's kind of supposed to keep up with inflation. But if you are using this measure, which I think is a truer measure, you'll see it's absolutely not at all close to keeping up with inflation. So that's the second piece of context that I needed to share in terms of like why so many people are struggling. So let's get into how can you actually navigate? Like, how can you get ahead in this kind of financial environment where things are just going up at such a rapid rate? It's incredibly hard to keep up. You can't rely on the traditional path of going to school, getting a job, saving your money, and in investing in traditional retirement, because clearly that is not going to cut it. I firmly believe you have to take an alternative path, and one that's going to be much more viable for not just surviving, but for actually building wealth. So what I talk about on this channel and what I do myself is I invest in high return assets. And you know me, I love real estate. And here's why it's kind of superior to like stocks and mutual funds, which is more of the traditional path. First, real estate generates cash flow, which is monthly rental income, which is the actual profit after you've paid for all costs, versus what stocks and mutual funds do is they rely on dividends, which can be inconsistent. They can cut dividends. It's usually like a yearly amount that they'll pay out to their shareholders. But dividends are generally not consistent and really shouldn't be relied on. The second benefit that real estate provides over stocks and mutual funds is that when you are investing in a rental property, other people are paying down your mortgage pay down, right? So you have this asset and other people are paying for it. The third advantage is that you get tax benefits called depreciation. So it's essentially a tax deduction that accounts for the wear and tear of a building. And if you meet certain criteria, you could do what's called bonus depreciation, which is a fantastic little tool where you can take the majority of depreciation in the first year. And then the fourth advantage of real estate is that you get appreciation of the home. So every year, on average, I would say home prices increase maybe like 5%, 8%. It really depends on the market and it depends on the asset class that you have. And of course, the location where you're in. But over time, you hold for long enough and that home will be worth significantly more than you originally paid for it. Now, what I love to talk about on this channel is really the difference between like traditional real estate investing and the investing that I do, which is in more higher cash flow homes, and that's through vacation rentals. Because most traditional real estate investments, like with long-term tenants who are renting, that'll just yield a few $100 a month in profit and cash flow, and it'll still have all of those other benefits I just mentioned, but your cash flow isn't really high. Now, I prefer vacation rentals because they can generate thousands in profit each month. And I'm actually going to show you, this was the last point I wanted to make in this video, exactly how much you can make through vacation rentals. All right, so let me see. So what I'm going to show you are, hopefully this will work, are my earnings from last year. Okay, so I am an Airbnb host, and you can see I took away all the private information. And this is based on 3 Airbnbs. You can see it's just over $90,000 in 2023. Now, imagine that you didn't spend any of this money, and of course, this isn't profit, right? This is like the net payout, and I still have to pay mortgage and fees. But take out 35-40%, you're still talking $50,000. What if you were to save all of that money, roll it forward, and every year, every 2 years, right? So you'd have about a little over $100,000 every 2 years. You invest that into a new home. So over the course of 10 years, you do that 5 times, and that's what, $250,000 a year in cash flow. Now, that's the power of not just real estate, but investing in really high cash flow real estate. And so that's why I do it, because you can make so much more money using this kind of strategy over another. So, I mean, the numbers really do speak for themselves. So if you want to learn more about how I do this, check out the playlist that I'm going to link here. I also have videos on how to buy raw land, and I really want you to stay tuned to this channel because pretty shortly I'm going to be making a special announcement. So thank you all so much for watching today's video. I hope that you found it helpful. Bye-bye.